We've got Graham Bartlett here again today, and he has a ton of expertise in the crime field. So he's going to share that with us. We're going to talk about his books and writing a series. And we're also going to do something a little bit different and fun with one of his books that we'll do near the end. Um, and it has to do with book clubbing. So we're just going to talk about that too. So I am going to turn it over to Graham now that I've totally lost my thought and let Graham introduce himself much better than I just did.
I think you did very well there, Christine.
Oh,
I
thank
don't think
you.
anybody noticed we had a link problem there. No one noticed, I'm sure.
No one noticed. No
Um,
one noticed.
I think we're fine. I think we got away with it. Well, hello everyone. Lovely to see you all. I was going to say good afternoon, good evening, because that's where I am. But I know people are all in different time zones, so all I say is happy Thursday. Lovely to come along to Fictionary again. I think it's the second or third time I've spoken with the group, and it's always a joy because there's always everyone's so passionate about their writing and about learning and discussing. It's a really good community. So I'm really honoured to be here again. So those of you who've not seen me before, not heard of me before, my name is Graham Bartlett. I'm a best-selling crime writer. And I'm also a police and crime advisor to other crime writers and to TV writers, TV makers, producers, directors, actors, that sort of thing. But in a previous life, I was a police officer. I was a detective for most of my career here in the UK. I was mainly based in a city called Brighton and Hove, which, for those of you that aren't familiar with the UK, it's about 50 miles south of London. It's on the south coast. It's a very busy sort of metropolitan city, quite small but very intense. Very lots of challenges around drugs and crime and poverty, and it's very politically active. So lots of protests and lots of things like that to deal with. Big sporting venues. Huge what we call nighttime economy, so pubs and clubs, and you know the British disease around people in pubs and clubs and how they behave when they've had too much to drink. All of that to deal with. So I worked there mostly as a detective, but my final 4 years there, I was the police commander for the city. So I was in charge of everything in the city. I always used to explain to my kids that if something went wrong in Brighton and Hove, then it was probably my fault ultimately, because you have to take ownership if you're the boss. So, but then I retired from the police, and as I say, now I'm a crime writer and an advisor. So, in terms of my crime writing, I've had published two non-fictions. The first one was written with a chap called Peter James, who many of you might know. He's a British crime writer. Very successful, writes fiction, but we wrote a non-fiction called Death Comes Knocking, Policing Roy Grace's Brighton, and that book was about the stories behind the Roy Grace novel. So he wanted to write with someone that had a policing background about the stories that inspired him to write the Roy Grace novels, and it was sort of fairly autobiographical. And that was my apprenticeship really to writing. I didn't really have any experience of commercial writing. I obviously wrote a lot of police work, police reports and statements and that sort of thing. My books are up on the screen there. So that's Death Comes Knocking, Policing Roy Grace's Brighton. That came out in 2016. And then my second non-fiction, which was Babes in the Wood. Honestly, say it's not for the faint-hearted. This one, it's about a double child murder in 1986, where the killer walked free and then went on to nearly kill another little girl. And because of a change in the law and developments in science, the police were able to recharge the killer with the murders and put him back before the court. It used to be a double jeopardy rule that you couldn't do that. And it's the story behind that. It's a 30-year story of injustice for the family, and it kind of culminates. It's not really a spoiler, but it culminates in his his subsequent conviction, which was actually 31 years to the day after he was originally acquitted, just by chance. So that was that. And then I thought, well, I'm fed up with researching facts. I want to make it all up now. And I thought this would be easy. I'll write some novels. And little did I know actually how hard that was, because of course when you're writing non-fiction, your world is there. You have the world, you have the characters. The story is set for you. How you tell it is obviously the challenge. But I don't know why I didn't think of this really, but I'm going to have to make it all up for my series of novels. So these are them. Bad for Good was the first one, and they're police procedurals with a political edge. So the main character is Chief Superintendent Jo Howe, and it's Jo she's a woman. She is doing the job that I used to do in Brighton. She's the police commander for Brighton, and she's dealing with the impacts of the cuts on policing. We've had huge cuts to policing in the UK in the last 14 years. She's dealing with the impacts of that. She's dealing with corruption. She's dealing with neo-Nazi politics. She's dealing with big pharmaceutical companies trying to sustain and fuel the drugs market. But in Bad for Good, which was my debut, that was the premise behind that is what happens when the police are cut so savagely that vigilantism takes over, and what happens if that vigilantism is actually state sponsored. So it starts with a murder, and then Jo finds herself. I won't tell you what exactly why, but she finds herself reluctantly being posted to as the police commander for the city, and she's still trying to solve this murder, but also she realizes that there is a darker force of law enforcement working against the police, and criminals are being snatched off the street. They're being housed in an old Napoleonic fort in the hillside, which is a real place, and they're being tortured and murdered in there. And this is the vigilantism trying to fill the gap that the policing can't. So that was Bad for Good, and then came along Force of Hate, which this is about a neo-Nazi. So a neo-Nazi council is elected into Brighton and Hove, and their aim is to rid the city of any group of people that's not like them. So they're trying to rid people of colour, people with different sexual orientations, people of different religions. Travellers, gypsies and travellers, and it starts off with a firebomb attack on a traveller's site where 4 people are killed in the middle of the night. And then Jo realises that this is actually linked to the council and starts to uncover a whole network of trafficked human trafficking victims working in the care sector, with euthanasia being in place to access these old people's wealth, all to sustain a massive terrorist plot that's going to basically eradicate thousands of people in the city. She's got to stop that. And then City on Fire. City on Fire is actually, they said it came out this year. This is a book that's actually based on a real life policing operation that I ran. And so Jo's sister has just been found dead in a squat from a drugs overdose, and she blames herself horrendously for not having spotted that her sister was a drug addict on her doorstep. And as the police commander, why didn't she do anything about it? So Jo takes it upon herself to develop a program where drug users go into treatment and drug dealers go into prison. And it's quite heavily funded. So there's new treatment places, and she's trying to scoop all the dealers off the street into treatment. Unbeknown to her, a big pharmaceutical boss called Sir Ben Parsons needs thousands of drug users on the streets of Brighton because he's just developed a new opiate substitute, and he wants to use Brighton as a test bed for it. So he sees the danger in what Jo is trying to do, so starts to use assassins, blackmail, kidnappings to try and stop Jo and her team from dealing with the drug problem in Brighton. Now, I had an operation which was just like that, which was to get users into treatment and drug. Luckily, I didn't have a Sir Ben Parsons trying to kill me and kill my family and snatch my officers off the street and hold them in dingy places. But that's my trilogy. So there may be more books coming. I'm not sure. I'm writing something else at the moment, but there may be more books coming. But it was writing that series was an absolute joy. But it was a huge challenge for me. Even though I took the adage of writing what you know to ridiculous extremes. You know, I was the divisional commander in Brighton, dealing with the politics, trying to keep my officers able to keep the streets safe, to arrest the bad people, protect the vulnerable, whilst trying to bat off some fairly aggressive politics, not violent politics that like I write about. So I was writing what I knew, but I suddenly realised that I've got to make this entertaining, and I've got to make it. I don't want people to be going to sleep at night. I want them to read one more chapter, and I want them to kind of ask what's happened, what's happened to Jo now, and what you're gonna. I mean, I get all sorts of emails about how dreadful I am to Jo. I love Jo to death, my character, but I do put her through the ringer. I do, I don't give her an easy time of it. I don't know whether it's something sort of in me that just is, just cathartic, but I do give her a hard time. So I had to, obviously I had to, as we all have to as novelists, have to think about the story and think about, what I'm going to do with Jo, and who am I going to surround Jo with, and who's going to be in book one, who are my main characters in book one, and who are going to be series characters, who's Jo's kind of little gang going to be, who's cohort, and are we going to have any antagonists going across the series, or are they discrete to each book? And these are things that I learned as I was going along, really. I mean, I've written non-fiction, as I say, and I've done that with a very, very experienced writer who kind of guided me very heavily. Certainly on the first book, Death Comes Knocking, guided me very heavily. But I was on my own on this one. I mean, I still spoke to Peter quite a lot about it, and still do. So I had to kind of.
Liam, can I ask you before you go further?
Yeah.
I'm dying to ask you. You chose a female protagonist. You got to tell us why.
That's always the first question.
I know. Like, come on, why?
Well, because I'd like to make life difficult for myself is probably the first answer. No, the reason I did it is the main reason, the first reason was because it was written, because she was going to be doing the job that I did in the city that I did it. I was worried as a debut novelist that if she was a man, I would start to write it almost autobiographically, and I thought, I might seep into kind of some of my values and my approaches and my experiences, and I thought I don't want to do that, because people know what I used to do, and they would just go, well, you've just fictionalized your own life here, and I didn't want that. So I thought, no, I will make her a woman. But then that, of course, brought some huge challenges, because I knew what it was like to get promoted and rise to a reasonably senior level in my police force as a straight white man. I've got no idea what it was like for a woman, or for an officer of color, or for a gay officer to do that. I always say that the pathway to promotion in the police, particularly in the UK, is designed for people like me, who look like me, who sound like me, who come from a background like me. And I didn't, so I had to learn an awful lot about what it was like for a woman to get to where Jo got to. And I'm fortunate to have some really good and straight talking friends who were recently retired women, senior women in the same forces, and they were really, I mean, I felt almost embarrassed that I didn't know what they went through. I mean, I knew that there was, the promotion procedures and the culture was sexist, even if it wasn't overtly sexist. It was, as I say, designed for men. It was it's quite a sort of male dominated organization. But I didn't realize the kind of the inner turmoils and how sometimes the prejudice can come from other women. I thought all the prejudice would come from the men. I thought it would be like, oh, well, you're never here because you're home looking after the kids, and how can you be? I think hopefully I'm exaggerating a little bit. I thought that was from the men, but Di, who helped me on this, said no, it's got that from the women as well. Particularly the women that were sort of junior to me, they would, she didn't know whether it was a jealousy thing or what, but they would go, well, you shouldn't be going for promotion. You've got a young family. Your husband's for that. Your husband is the one who you should be supporting. And she, what? What? And this is a woman. So and I didn't realize any of that. I didn't realize also that I mean, Di, who's the one that I use mainly, Diane. She was a young mum like Joe is, and her husband was actually in the police, and her husband's a really nice guy. I know her husband well as well, really nice guy. But all the time she was at work, she would feel guilty because she felt she should be at home with the kids, and all the times that she was with the kids, she felt guilty because she should be out there pulling her weight at work, and no one was telling her that, or no, not overtly telling her that. So I wanted to get all of this into Jo, and I wanted to get her sort of insecurities. I mean, imposter syndrome was massive. I mean, I think we all suffer from that. I suffer from it certainly, but it was massive with among the women that I spoke to. Because they would think, for example, oh well, I only got promoted on this round of promotions, or I only got picked for that job because they're meeting a quota. And I'm sure it's the same for officers of colour, and that they think that as well. So they have to work extra hard to prove to others that they're there on merit. My experience is that, frankly, the women doing my job were better at it than I was, and the blokes were, because I think they cared more. I mean, I cared a lot, but they deeply cared, and they felt they had to prove themselves every single day. So that's why I wrote it. So I chose to wrote Jo as a woman, so it wouldn't be autobiographical. But once I'd done that, I found that I could write a much richer character, a much deeper character, more layered character than I would if it was a bloke, particularly if it was a white bloke.
That's really interesting in choosing a protagonist, and a super thing for people to think about on those two reasons. One, that you have to do a lot of research if it's not someone similar to you, and two, you don't write you if it's someone similar to you. There's a couple other interesting things that you've said in here. So on the series, so each book is an individual story. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the underlying story of Jo as she goes through and grows and changes from book to book. Okay.
Yeah.
So all my series people here, who knows? Type in what type of series this is. Open, there it is. Who got that first? Ash. Yeah.
Ash.
Okay. We talk a lot, Graham, about an open series is exactly.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know it was an open series. So
I know, but it's our secret lingo at Fictionary of how to decide what kind of a series you're writing. And so you can have a closed series where it's one story over 3 books, like Hunger Games, Twilight, whatever. That it's one story but in multiple books. Or you have an open series like you have, where the common uniting factor is either character or setting. And so you've got both in yours, which makes it doubly strong, because the character's Jo, and so she's the uniting factor in every story. And it's in the same police force in the same city. So the setting is also a uniting factor. And that's what makes this a series, as opposed to crime novels that are written in different cities, different detectives, different, they're just individual novels. This is clearly a series. So of course there's going to be more than 3 books. We all know it. You're going to get pressured to do it. You're just going to have to sit down and do it. And the other thing you said earlier is about the reader not going to sleep. And that's something we also talk a lot about in Fictionary. We don't want the reader to put your book down and go to bed. We want them to turn that page to the next scene. And so we talk a lot about exit hooks and how do you end a scene to go into the next scene. So I'm curious, do you consciously think about that, or are you just lucky and are a natural writer that it appears?
No, I consciously think of it. I wouldn't say I was a natural writer in any regard. I mean, when I was writing the first drafts of Bad for Good, I kind of misunderstood that and thought that it needed to be a cliffhanger on the end of everyone. But it kind of it either need for me it either needs to be a massive question that's asked, or a huge and obvious stepping stone to something else, and they need to find out what that something else is. So all of my scenes and all of my chapters end with something that is then going to make you turn the page. And I think that was something I consciously did and worked really. I mean, Bad for Good took me 7 years to write. You know, it took me an awful long time
Sorry, say that
to
again.
get it. It
What?
took me 7 years to write, from
7 years. Okay,
conception to
there we go. Everybody
publication.
heard that? 7 years,
That's
right?
not
That first book is
that's not good
written for.
practice. It's not, don't take that as as how you should do it. But you know, there was lots of mistakes on the way, and lots of kind of I was finding my writing process on the way. But that was one thing that I did know, because you know, like all of us, I'm a huge reader as well. So I like to read what, you know, I like, that's how I like to read. I like to get to the end of a scene or a chapter, and there to be a resolution, but then a doorway into something else. I want to be so curious because of the way it's been set up and left, that I've got to go through that doorway.
Right.
So that's how I try to write as well.
Nice. Now, okay, so tell me, what did you learn writing book one that you used in book two that made book two a little bit easier to write?
Okay, so a few things. The first one is, so it took me far too long to write book one, far too long. That was because I would write it. I would start writing it. I'd get to, let's say, 10,000 words, and I would go back and I would edit that 10,000 words. And then I would change something fundamental in that. So then I might need to go back again. And then I would start, and I'd move forward to 12,000 words and then go back. And I literally was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I spoke to an author who I was actually advising, an author called Dorothy Coomson, who some of you will know. And she, every time I spoke to her about her book, she was going, "Well, how are you getting on with your book?" And I go, "Oh yeah, I'm, you know, 15,000 words in now." And then I go, "Oh yeah, 18,000 words in now. Oh yeah, now I'm 12,000 words in." She, "Hang on a minute, you know, you're going backwards, aren't you?" And she said to me, and is something that I absolutely live by now, is first draft, just write it. Just get the story down. Just, you know, it's a bit like an artist, you know, pencil sketch the story out. You know, don't worry about your prose at this point. Don't worry about, you know, where your acts fall. Don't worry about how long it is. Tell yourself a story, and then go back and do all of those structural things that you know you'll need to do, including, you know, cutting scenes, cutting characters, and that sort of thing. So that was the first thing. The second thing around structure is I then did a course. I don't know if people have heard of the John York Story course.
Mhm.
So John York Story is a big champion of the 5-act structure, and I did a course. It was actually a course for screenwriters, but it worked for me in terms of understanding structure and roles of protagonists, antagonists, and needs and wants, and that sort of thing. So I kind of I learned that, and I actually learned that in time to just go back and just tweak Bad for Good. But Force of Hate I wrote on that plan. So basically, you know, I wrote it to that model. The most significant thing, though, I think, in terms of the reader experience in Bad for Good, I had far too many characters and far too many far too many, or too much procedure in there. And I think, you know, I know why that is, because obviously I used to be in the police, and I know what it takes to investigate a murder, and I know how, you know, certain operations are run and what it takes to do it. So I felt the need to write that all down. So I had, you know, I might have had sort of 15 characters, or, you know, in the murder incident room, all named, all kind of sketched out, and it was my agent who said to me, "You know, what are you doing? What are all these characters for? Why?" And I said, "Well, you know, that's how many people it takes. You've got to, you know, that's, if you investigate a murder, you know, that's how." And it was different. I changed my agent halfway through, but she said to me, she said, "Well, yeah, but no one cares. You know, no one, they only care they can't hold all those people in their heads. And she said, and the other thing you've got, because you've got them, you've got some extraneous storylines that are just kind of almost like vanity storylines. They don't really go anywhere in terms of the story itself. So I had to, so I really kind of focused in on okay, well, who do I want the reader to follow? Who do I want the readers to care about? So basically, I whittled those down to. I mean, there are some sort of bit parts still, but I've got three really. So I've got Joe. I've got Joe. I've got Bob Heaton, who is a detective inspector, and Gary Hedges, who's Joe's deputy. Now they go through all three books, and they all develop with Joe, and they all have a kind of a different kind of relationship with Joe. But they're the only ones that you really need to worry about. And if I need a patrol officer to come on sirens to something, I just have to. It's the same one every time. It's something called Wendy. I can't remember what her surname is, but she's Wendy. So she's the one that turns up, because I don't want the readers to be worried about sort of trying to hold all these people in their head, and particularly if they don't understand policing and they don't know what the rank structure is like, and what are these, so that was really, really, really focus in on that, and cut some of the procedure, literally just sort of not. I wouldn't cut it in a way that makes the story implausible, but I would skate over it, or I would kind of I would just build I mean, I'll give an example. So when somebody's arrested, you have to find them first of all, then you have to arrest them, and you have to read them their rights, and then you have to get them to the police station, and you have to put them in, and they have to be processed and fingerprint, da 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 da, and then they go into interview. Well, the only two exciting bits of that are the arrest and the interview. The rest of it is just admin.
Yep.
So what I learned to do was, right, okay, well, let's have a really it doesn't have to be a violent, but a really engaging arrest scene. Where maybe there's they're hiding somewhere, or there's a bit of a chase or something. Really, and then I would mimic the passing of time by putting another scene from somewhere else in, and then the next scene would be an interview. So you're then cutting out sort of 3 hours of admin, and things like that. It's kind of so I sort of developed this phrase for myself that.
So I've got to say something there. So that,
Yeah.
okay, you just slipped it in there, but that's a huge tip. You want to mimic the passage of time, is what you just said, right?
Mm.
And so there, when you're writing and you're thinking of writing, you write from different points of view. That's a great time to put in somebody else's point of view and give that piece of the story, and then come back, and then time has gone by, and it seems like it's gone by to the reader, and it's not just immediate skip. That is brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, and it's you don't even have to kind of say how much time has gone by. You just so if you're at the arrest scene, and then you're with one of the antagonist sidekicks when they're kind of burying the body or something, and then you come back to the interview scene, the reader will make up their own mind about what type, but they'll know that arrest didn't go straight into interview. They'll know that something's happened in the meantime, but they don't need to know that, because that's dull.
Yeah, I love these tips, because one, it's coming out exactly what we teach at Fictionary. So, okay, that makes me very happy. Always, always, including you're talking about the number of characters and what are they doing and all of these things. And our tool for that is we have people write a skeleton blurb about their story, and it's just who's the protagonist. So Joe, what's her goal? Solve crime. What's at stakes? Gonna die if she doesn't. These are the things, book after book. That's generally what the story's about. And then when you look at everything in your book, does it make it easier or harder for her to achieve that goal? Yes or no? And if it's neither, why is it in the book? Right? It's just other stories that we like to tell because it's interesting to us. Because we're writing about a topic that we know, and we want everything to be in there because, of course, it's interesting. But
yeah, I mean, I had a great. I thought it was a great storyline in Bad for Good. That it was about an officer being attacked. And the message comes over the radio, and people dash out of the police station, and they're driving around the streets, and they're hearing all this screaming over the open mics, and they get there, and I had to cut it. I had to cut it for them. I was devastated because I loved it. So I cut it and put it to one side, and then it appeared in a different form in City on Fire in the third book. So it wasn't wasted. I still
Oh,
got to use it, but
oh,
I used it in a much more story relevant way than just I like this scene because I enjoyed writing it. So,
super. That also super interesting. When you cut a scene, put it somewhere else. I just want to say, if people want to ask questions, you're welcome to. You can come off mute. You can type in the chat. Don't be shy because we have Graham here as an expert, also in the policing field. So if anyone here is writing a crime thriller mystery and you've got specific questions, you can ask those too, and we'll just put Graham on the spot.
always put me on the spot. Everyone does.
Yeah, so let's talk about with the series, how are you transitioning from one book to the next so that when somebody puts down book one, they want to read book two or stop, at the end of book two, they want to read book three?
So I have I always finish on a massive twist in terms of not in terms of the plot, but in terms of the characters. So at the end of every book, literally the last paragraph, something is revealed, something happens that makes you go, "Oh my god, what is?" And I'm not going to tell you what they are, but the
No,
one
no.
on the one on Force of Hate, the end of Force of Hate, I literally had people phoning me up going, I cannot believe you've done that. And it's another year till you're going to send them. You cannot believe, how have you done that? Why have you done that? People get really cross. The people that I know get really cross with me about it. I said,
Oh,
well,
oh.
because then you'll buy a book, you'll buy the next one when it comes out.
Well, now you got to
Um,
write it. Oh no, you do have that's book two, right? That was book
that book
two.
two,
So,
yeah,
okay, so
yeah.
book three is there. Whew, okay, good. You've done it.
Book
Good
three,
job.
yeah. It's the same in book three. It's like there's something sort of just before that in book three. There's a real bit of sleight of hand, which I don't know if anyone has this anxiety that I have when I'm writing twists or holding back for reveals. I always think that I'm kind of giving it away because I'm writing it with that in my, I know what
Yeah,
I'm doing
sure.
in my head, but I think, God, have I inadvertently given something away? So I'll always give my books before it goes anywhere near my agent or anyone like that. Um, I will always give it to somebody who I've not talked to about the book at all because I want
Right.
them at the end of it. I mean, I'm right at the beginning of it. I'm just writing the first book in a new series at the moment, and there's three real sort of gosh wow moments in that, and I absolutely thought that I've signposted them from page one, but apparently I didn't. So I must have.
Oh, so that's
I
good.
must have.
And
Yeah,
and
it
that's the
doesn't. It
value.
doesn't mean somebody might get it, but I mean, I've had people like in Bad for Good. There is it's also a who done it as well as a what on earth is Joe going to do kind of thriller sort of thing. And I've had about three people say they guessed the killer in that one, but that's fine. Lots of people have read it,
Then they
so
just feel good about themselves, right?
yeah,
You're
yeah,
like, oh, I got it. And so, that's
yeah,
okay too.
yeah.
So Brandy, who writes in multiple genres, her question is, do officers call each other by their first name, last name, rank, nickname? How do they call it? What do they call
Oh,
each other?
Brandy, this is my favourite subject to advise on. It's the one that most people get wrong, and it's not. That's not a criticism of them because they don't know. So most officers will call each. So officers of the same rank will call each other by their first name. They will hardly ever call each other by their surname. It's not like the military. So they will hardly ever call them by their surname. Um, so they'll call them by their first name. If they're talking to an officer, say they're, so I'm going to use UK ranks here. So the lowest rank in the UK is constable, detective constable, or police constable. They're talking to their sergeant, who's the next rank up. They would call them sarge or sergeant, or sometimes skip, which is just slang for that. And the sergeant will call them by their first name. So I might sort of say, Christina might say, "Oh, Sarge" to me, and I might say, "Okay, Christina, yeah, I can talk to you now." So that it's like that. In the UK, if above the rank of sergeant, say inspector is the next rank in the UK, then people at that rank are called either ma'am or sir or gov sometimes or boss. So they have a different kind of nickname for their rank, or they're called by their rank. But again, and they will call their juniors by their first names. So, but nicknames is also one that comes up, and the more imaginative the nickname, the better. I mean, we had an officer when I was at Gatwick. I used to police Gatwick Airport, and it was long time ago. And you're not going to believe this, particularly for those of you that work in countries where officers are armed all the time. But we were one of the only armed units in Sussex at Gatwick, and the men used to carry their pistols in their revolvers in their pockets, just normal trouser pockets, no holsters, nothing like that. And the women used to carry them in their handbags. And so this particular woman, one day it was a hot day. She bought a bar of chocolate at the shop in the airport and just put it in her handbag. Forgot about it. When it came to hand her gun back, the chocolate had melted all over the gun and it completely ruined the gun. So her nickname became Cadbury's. Cadbury's is probably our version of Hershey's if you're in the States. So her name, so evermore she was called Cadbury. And it became almost like if you didn't have a nickname on the team, then people, you didn't really fit it in. And there was one chap who joined the team, and we couldn't think of a nickname for him, but we thought, well, we don't want him to feel that he doesn't fit in, so we called him Pending, because we were still thinking of his nickname. And he went through 30 years, his nickname was Pending, because that's just how it stuck. So that awesome. The more bizarre the nickname, the better.
That's a good one. I love it. Bernie, that was a very good question. Okay, Giothy says, I have a crime series with romance subplot. What's a good ratio for main plot to subplot? Roughly, I think right now I have 65% main plot, 35% subplot. Is that too much subplot?
I mean, it depends how you write it, I suppose, and it depends what your readers expect. I would say it probably is slightly too high, but only by about 5% or so. I would say if you went 70-30, I think that would probably accentuate the main plot more, but also give the subplot prominence. Because what you don't want to have sort of like 90-10, where the subplot almost feels like an afterthought. The subplot has to kind of talk along to the reader as well. So I personally speaking, I would go 70-30. But it's a matter for you, really, and it's a matter how strong you want that subplot to be, and whether that subplot sort of comes into the main plot at the end, or whether it's something that's going to go across the series.
Excellent. Oh, I love it. Specifics. That's awesome. All right. Ash says, what was your biggest aha moment as you work to learn, understand the craft of story and becoming an author?
I think it was what I said earlier. It was just about being kinder to myself on first draft. I angst over first draft for a couple of years. Kept going back, wanting it to be perfect all the way. But I didn't know what the story was. I knew roughly I knew where I wanted to get with the story, but I didn't know what happened to all the characters, and so it was wasted work because I was kind of honing something that I would only have to unpick later, because I decided that that my characters would do some, would have another motivation, or there would be another complication in their life, and therefore they wouldn't have done what I'd spent so many hours honing earlier on. So I'd just be kinder to myself on first draft and just get the thing down. And I mean, my first drafts, I have little notes in the margin just saying to myself, change, this is rubbish, but then I'm moving on. So just literally a little note, change, this is rubbish, or even like, you've got to be kidding, as I've kind of written this scene, you've got to be kidding, because I know that I'll probably, when I go back to it, I wouldn't need it. It would scream that out to me, but I would just know that that's something I had to pay additional attention to.
Yeah,
and sometimes
sorry, go ahead.
All I was going to say, sometimes actually the things that you think aren't very good, when you go back and read them, they're not that bad. It's not as bad as I thought. Sorry.
It does happen. No, I was just going to say the word you brought out there was kindness, right? Kindness. We're all about kindness here, because I just believe if we're kind to ourselves, kind to each other, our creativity is going to be better. We're in a better frame of mind to create our art. And so I love that word, and I'm happy it's in there. So Mike has a very technical question. Can cell phone calls be monitored by the police? Don't think.
Um, Technically, yes, they can. WhatsApp can't, but normal kind of cellular mobile phone cell phone calls can. It depends where. It depends on which country or which jurisdiction you're writing in. It depends on how readily they can do that. So in the UK, for example, yes, they can. They do have the technology to monitor the calls, but you have to have the Home Secretary, so basically, a senior government minister's permission to do that, and you can't use what you get from that from monitoring that call as evidence. You can only use it as intelligence, so you can't produce it in court. Don't ask me why; it just seems nonsense to me. But in other places you can, so you can monitor mobile phone calls. But so the technology is there. It's just whether you can do it, and if you can, how you can use it that differs from place to place.
Now we all want to see what Mike is writing about and whose call
Yeah.
needs to be monitored. Like, who's in
If
that
Mike's
book?
worried about a call he made today, they're probably not now, Mike. So I wouldn't worry about the call you made earlier.
Yeah, that one's
If that's
okay.
what
Don't
was
worry about that one. That's fine. They don't know who you are yet. Next, we have Linda O'Donnell, who is our Fictionary kindness ambassador. She also loves kindness, and she says, "My protagonist ends up." Oh, see,
You're right
kindness
there, Linda.
changes everything.
Does
It does. I
absolutely,
love that, Linda. So,
absolutely.
Linda's protagonist ends up unfairly accused of two murders that each occur in a different city. How would law enforcement handle that? Would the two jurisdictions cooperate, or would one take precedence?
Um, Linda, can I just ask what country are you set in these?
She's in the US. Are your books in the US?
In in the US? Okay, I'm not entirely sure about the ownership of those. I must admit, for the kindness ambassador to unfairly accuse someone of two murders doesn't sound very kind to me. That's just a comment. But so I mean, I'll say what it's like in the UK and what it might be like in the US. So in the UK, one would take precedence, and they would have cooperation with the other one. So you would formally link the two murders, and you'd have a senior officer who would be in charge of both murders, but you would have officers from both cities involved in the investigation, but it would be owned by one, for simplicity. The reason that can work in the UK is because police officers have nationwide jurisdiction, so which isn't the same in the States. So it all depends on the jurisdictional constraints. If it was in the same state, then very possibly they would be able to work together. If it was in different states, then there would be some arrangement that would allow, because what you don't want is you don't want two forces investigating the same two police departments investigating the same thing, in different ways at different times. You're going to get overlaps, you're going to get gaps. It's going to be chaotic. So there must be protocols in the states that allow for that. But I really sorry, I don't know what they are.
Okay, then we will go on to Michelle, who says, if a person is not a suspect but being interviewed by police to help them with their inquiries, i.e., the person's partner has been murdered, can the person have a family or friend present at the interview?
Yes, they can, as long as that family or friend isn't a witness themselves. So if you say you had the witness or the person that you're talking to, and their sister, they want their sister there, for example, but their sister, might also have something pertinent to say about the case, so they want to get a statement from her. Then what the police would say is, they would say, well, you can have someone with you, but we can't have her in the room when we're interviewing you, because we want to interview her, sort of fresh, basically. So, but yeah, they can have somebody present, and certainly in the UK, there's nobody has to talk to the police. So, if it came to it, and they said, well, if I can't have anyone with me, then I'm not going to talk to you. then theoretically they can't talk to the police. I mean, you would start to think very suspiciously about why they wouldn't want to talk to them. But quite often people do want someone there just to help them along the way. And certainly if they've got any barriers to understanding or any issues around communication or anything like that, then they would have somebody there to help and support them, or an interpreter of language if the language that the officer's speaking is not their first language.
Oh, and there's a good way to make people think character A is guilty by just making them not want to be interviewed.
Yeah.
Oh,
we've assumed that on lots of occasions where people don't want to be interviewed. I mean, believe it or not everyone wants to be interviewed by the police. Can't understand.
No, it's just too scary. Come on. People have never been interviewed. It's just too scary. Okay, so Jothy says, I have a crime series. Oh, wait, I'm up too far. Hang on, we did that one. Dirt. Hang on, I've lost where I am in my chat. What happened to my chat?
I think that was Brandy replying to that, so I think that's why that one's coming.
Oh, is that why that? Oh,
yeah, I think
Brandy replying. Brandy's one of our Fictionary certified story coach editors, and so there she is. Okay, Corinne says, "Hi, Corinne. I have a London officer who speaks to an American by phone and informs him, the American, of the death of his father. What would Oh, this is a great question. What would the rank of the officer be, and how would she say her name with title? Here we say Detective Reagan. What would they say?"
So it would probably be, because we don't, in the UK, we don't tend to just use the term detective. We would say Detective Constable or Detective Sergeant or DC or DS, shortening it down. So in this situation, I would say it would either be a Detective Constable or a Detective Sergeant. So she would say Detective Sergeant Reagan or Detective Constable Reagan from the Metropolitan Police. And I've got some terrible news to give you. We try not to do death messages by phone for reasons of compassion, really, but sometimes you can't avoid it, particularly if it's overseas. It is it's a terrible thing to have to do. I've never had to do one by phone. I've done lots personally, but never by phone. So the officer herself, I would imagine Reagan. We have a role here called a family liaison officer who is attached to the family, and they're an investigator, and they're there to kind of work with the family and try and get as much information and evidence from the family in a compassionate way as they possibly can. And because that's a particularly difficult and tricky message to phone with, I would imagine that Reagan she's trained as a family liaison officer, but it would be Detective Constable or Detective Sergeant Reagan, I'd imagine.
Nice. That's a phone call no one ever wants to make, for sure. Okay, we're in our last 7 minutes. I want to throw something out there before we ask any final questions of Graham. So here's the link. It's a really long link, but that's the link to Bad for Good on Amazon.com. So tonight I am going to my monthly book club meeting, and it's the meeting where we pick our books. And I'm new to this book club, and I haven't suggested any books yet because I'm just trying to sit back and listen. So I gotta suggest a book. So I'm going to suggest Bad for Good, so I can talk about Graham today, our interview today. Like, how cool is this? I just talked to this guy. Let's do this book. But what I was thinking, because obviously everybody's interested in the genre, we could choose this book as a book club, online book club book. And sometime in September, let's all get together and talk about the book. So if you're interested in that, send me a DM in the community. We will set up a time in September, and we can have like a, I don't know, online Fictionary book club just for fun, because we are about books. So the link here is Amazon.com. So I'm sure you can click from there to any of the other Amazons, depending on the country that you're in. Mine is Amazon.ca, of course, where I'm going to get the book. But I thought that might be fun just for something different to try in the community, see how it goes. Do we like having a book club? Wendy is in. Yay. Okay, Wendy, I'm glad.
Wendy, good. I love you, Wendy.
Look at that. Wendy has a fan. That's awesome. Fantastic. Okay, so Graham, why don't we end with what is your favorite part of being a fiction author?
I think my favorite part is publication day, when you suddenly realize that people are receiving either on their doormat or from their bookshops, that what you've been sweating over for the last sort of year or so, and it's a huge sense of achievement, and seeing your book cover and your name on the book, and then starting to hear the feedback. I absolutely love it. It's obviously it can be nerve-wracking as well, but I do love the writing process, but actually just getting it out there and just suddenly people are seeing it, talking about it is just amazing. So yeah, that's my favorite part.
So that 7 years it took to do the first book, it came down to one day of
One day. I should tell you, the others haven't taken 7 years, so that I need to say that, because otherwise
Yeah.
you're going to think that I'll take. So, but yeah, Bad for Good 7 years, Force of Hate probably a year, just over a year, and City on Fire about 8 months. So I'm getting better. I'm writing faster, and I know what I'm doing now.
Yes, now you practiced on 5 books. So
Yeah.
oh, Linda's into, look at all these people. I'm going to have my own little book club.
Yeah, Linda, Mike's there. Good.
Yeah. Okay, now you got to answer one more question from Ash, because it's totally related. Now I'm curious.
Is absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So when I was writing Force of Hate, I wrote a 2 or 3 page outline for myself based on the 5-act structure, and I kind of I put the waypoints in at the turning points at the end of each act, and the inciting incident, and the midpoint twist, and the worst point, etc. And then I kind of then just wrote it, and I knew where my word count needed to be roughly. I wasn't worried too much about it, but I knew where I needed to be at each particular point. So that kept me focused on the story and on Joe's development as a character. And that was the biggest influence on cutting that time down. I kind of knew I had a structure and approach that I felt confident I could use, and I stuck to it, and did the same on City on Fire as well.
Okay, so if Lucy were here, I think you've met Lucy. She's our community manager. She would have her pom-poms out right now. If someone had pom-poms, they should shake them. Linda has pom-poms. There we go. And here is why.
Of course she has.
Of course she does. She's our kindness ambassador.
She's a kindness person.
She is. She knows you need pom-poms. Lucy started it, and it just kind of took off here. So when we teach our outlining course, we teach exactly what you just said, of find those 5 story arc scenes and go from there. Like, it just makes the whole process so much faster than trying to write from page 1 forward. That, you had to learn that the hard way from practice. And we just share that information with people because we're kind.
Yeah, I know. I could have come to you before, and it would have saved me half my life, wouldn't it? But I didn't. So there we go.
Oh, it's so funny.
So stick with Fictionary, or you'll end up like me. You don't want that.
No, I think though many people do, because look at your success. So yeah, maybe just want it faster. That's all. Well, Graham, thank you so much again for coming in.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
It's always, Brandy says she's in the car. She doesn't have her pom-poms. It's always fascinating to hear what you have to say. And I always learn a ton. And I'm super looking forward to reading your first book and having 2 book clubs about it. So that's going to be really cool.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Thank you for all your great questions, and for being here, and your attention and everything. It's a privilege to do this.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. This is recorded, so it will go out in the community. If you're going to read the book and come to the book club, then watch the video again, so then we can all critique it and see what Graham said is true.
It's fiction. Of course it's not true.
Oh, that's right. That's right. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.